The morning rush at Mel's roadside diner in Bakersfield, California, was in full swing when three men in civilian clothes walked through the front door. They moved with a precision that made heads turn, shoulders squared, eyes scanning, footsteps synchronized. But it wasn't their military bearing that would change everything for the man behind the grill. It was what they would notice hanging around his neck while he flipped pancakes and scrambled eggs, something he'd worn every day for the past 15 years, without anyone understanding its true meaning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chen had been working the breakfast shift at Mel's for 3 years now, and he'd perfected the rhythm. Crack 2 eggs, flip the hash browns, pour the coffee, smile at the regulars. The diner sat on Highway 58, a strategic stop for truckers heading between Los Angeles and the Central Valley. Most customers were passing through, tired drivers needing caffeine and a warm meal before hitting the road again. But Marcus wasn't just passing through anywhere. At 42, this was his life now. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., open the diner by 5 o'clock, work until 2 p.m., then head home to his small apartment above the auto parts store down the street. It was quiet, predictable, and exactly what he needed. The morning sun streamed through the diner's large windows, casting long shadows across the red vinyl booths. Mel's hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Chrome fixtures, checkered floor tiles, and a jukebox in the corner that only played country classics. The smell of bacon grease and coffee had soaked into every surface over the decades, creating an atmosphere that felt frozen in time. Marcus moved efficiently between the grill and the coffee station, his calloused hands steady as he prepared order after order. He'd learned to work fast during his previous life, though none of the customers knew about that. Here he was just the cook who rarely spoke unless spoken to, who kept his head down and did his job well. The breakfast crowd was typical for a Tuesday, a few local contractors grabbing coffee before heading to job sites, an elderly couple who came in every week for their anniversary breakfast, and several long-haul truckers fueling up for the day ahead. The conversations flowed around him like background noise, complaints about traffic, discussions of weather, plans for the weekend. Around 8:30, the bell above the door chimed, and 3 men entered. Marcus glanced up briefly from the grill, noting their appearance automatically. Mid-30s to early 40s, athletic builds, short haircuts. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, polo shirts, casual jackets, but something about them stood out. Maybe it was the way they surveyed the room before choosing a booth, or how they positioned themselves to have clear views of both the entrance and the back exit. One of them, a tall man with sandy brown hair and intense blue eyes, caught Marcus's attention for a moment longer than the others. There was something familiar about his bearing, though Marcus couldn't place it. The man's gaze swept the diner methodically before settling on his companions. "Anywhere you'd like," called out Diane, the morning waitress, as she finished taking an order from table 6. Diane had been working at Mel's longer than anyone could remember. She knew every regular customer's order by heart and had a way of making even the grumpiest truckers smile with her easy banter. The 3 men chose a booth near the window, settling in with the casual efficiency of people accustomed to working together. Marcus returned his attention to the grill, flipping pancakes and monitoring the hash browns that were reaching the perfect golden brown color. "What can I get you, boys?" Diane approached their table with her order pad ready, her practiced smile in place. "Coffee all around," the sandy-haired man replied. His voice carried a slight southern accent, professional but friendly. "And we'll need a few minutes to look at the menu." "Coming right up," Diane said, heading to the coffee station. Marcus continued working, muscle memory guiding his movements as he plated the pancakes and added a side of crispy bacon. He'd developed an ability over the years to work while remaining aware of his surroundings, a skill that had served him well in his previous life and continued to be useful now, even in the relative safety of a small-town diner. The grill sizzled as he started a new batch of eggs, the sound mixing with the low murmur of conversation throughout the restaurant. Tuesday mornings were usually peaceful, a welcome contrast to the hectic weekend shifts when the diner filled with families and travelers. "Order up," Marcus called, sliding the finished plates across the pass-through window to Diane. As she delivered the food to table 4, Marcus began preparing the next orders. The rhythm was soothing. Crack, flip, pour, plate. It was honest work, and after everything he'd been through, honest work felt like a luxury. The 3 newcomers were studying their menus with more attention than most customers gave them. Marcus had seen the type before, military, either active duty or recently separated. Their posture, the way they communicated with subtle glances, the automatic situational awareness. He recognized it because he'd once lived it. "Excuse me," the sandy-haired man called toward the kitchen. "Could we get some more coffee when you have a chance?" "Absolutely," Diane replied, already reaching for the coffee pot. Marcus found himself watching the interaction with mild interest. The man's politeness seemed genuine, not the forced courtesy of someone trying to blend in. These weren't people hiding from anything. They carried themselves with the confidence of individuals comfortable with who they were and what they did. As Diane refilled their cups, Marcus caught fragments of their conversation. Something about logistics, timing, and coordination. Professional talk, but vague enough to mean anything. They could have been discussing a construction project or planning a fishing trip. The breakfast rush was winding down by 9:15. Most of the truckers had gotten back on the road, and the local workers had headed to their job sites. The diner settled into its mid-morning quiet period, with just a handful of customers lingering over coffee and newspapers. Marcus began cleaning the grill, scraping away the accumulated grease and food particles from the morning's cooking. It was methodical work that allowed his mind to wander, though he trained himself over the years not to let it wander too far into certain territories. The three men were still at their table, having ordered a substantial breakfast: eggs, bacon, hash browns, toast, the works. They ate with the focused efficiency of people who understood the importance of good nutrition, another small detail that reinforced Marcus's assessment of their background. "How's everything tasting?" Diane asked as she passed their table. "Outstanding," replied the man with the southern accent. "Been driving since yesterday afternoon. This is exactly what we needed." "Traveling far?" Diane asked, making the kind of small talk that came naturally to experienced waitresses. "Just passing through on business," he replied with a friendly but non-committal smile. Marcus appreciated that response. Professional but not secretive, engaging without revealing anything significant. These men knew how to interact with civilians while maintaining their operational security, another indication of their probable background. The morning sun had climbed higher, and the diner's interior had grown warmer. Marcus adjusted the ventilation fan above the grill and continued his cleaning routine. In a few hours, Diane would head home and the lunch shift would begin, bringing a different rhythm and a different crowd. As he worked, Marcus was aware of the small weight against his chest, a piece of metal that had hung around his neck for 15 years, hidden beneath his work shirt. It was something he never thought about anymore, as much a part of him as his own heartbeat. Just a reminder of a different time, a different life, when his days had been measured not in breakfast orders and coffee refills, but in missions completed and brothers protected. The three men finished their meal and lingered over coffee, their conversation now turning to lighter topics: sports, weather, plans for the evening. Normal talk between friends or colleagues, taking a break from whatever had brought them together. Marcus began prepping for the lunch shift, chopping vegetables and checking supplies. The familiar routine kept his hands busy while his mind remained peacefully blank, focused only on the immediate tasks before him. This was the life he'd chosen, and most days, it felt like enough. The lunch crowd began filtering in around 11:30, bringing with it the familiar sounds of scraping chairs and animated conversations. Marcus had switched gears from breakfast prep to lunch mode, firing up the deep fryer and checking the soup stock that had been simmering since early morning. The three men from breakfast were long gone, having paid their check and departed around 10:15 with polite nods to Diane. Marcus had watched them leave through the kitchen service window, noting how they moved as a unit even in something as simple as walking to their vehicle, a black Ford pickup with Nevada plates. Now the diner buzzed with a different energy. Local business people grabbed quick sandwiches between meetings. Construction crews from nearby sites crowded into the larger booths, and the usual collection of retirees claimed their regular spots at the counter. Marcus knew most of their orders without being told: the BLT with extra mayo for Tom from the hardware store, grilled cheese and tomato soup for Mrs. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday after her doctor's appointment. "Fire 2 burgers, medium well, 1 with cheese," Diane called out, sliding the ticket across the pass. Marcus nodded and started the patties, the familiar sizzle filling the kitchen as meat hit the hot grill. The lunch rush demanded a different rhythm than breakfast: faster, more intense, with multiple orders cooking simultaneously. He'd learned to juggle timing, so everything for a table finished at the same moment, hot and ready. Around 12:45, just as the lunch crowd was hitting its peak, the front door opened again. This time it was a single customer. A woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a faded denim shirt and work boots. She moved with purpose, scanning the room before choosing a seat at the counter directly in front of the kitchen pass. "Afternoon, hon," Diane greeted her. "Coffee to start?" "Please," the woman replied, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested years of cigarettes, though Marcus didn't smell smoke on her. "And I'll take whatever soup you've got today." "Chicken and dumplings made fresh this morning," Diane said, pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus ladled the soup into a bowl, adding a small plate of crackers before sliding it across the pass. The woman caught his eye briefly and nodded her thanks. There was something about her gaze that suggested she saw more than most people, a quality Marcus recognized from his former life. The afternoon progressed with its usual ebb and flow. The business lunch crowd thinned out by 1:30, replaced by a slower stream of customers. Teenagers grabbing sodas after school, travelers stopping for directions and snacks, locals meeting friends for late lunches and early dinners. Marcus was wiping down the grill when he noticed the woman at the counter had been nursing the same cup of coffee for over an hour, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen but mostly watching the front door. Her behavior triggered a subtle alertness in him, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly why. "Can I get you anything else?" Diane asked, refilling the woman's cup for the third time. "Actually," the woman said, lowering her voice, "I'm looking for someone, wondering if you might know him." Diane's expression shifted slightly, becoming more guarded. After years of working in a truck stop diner, she'd developed good instincts about when conversations might be heading in uncomfortable directions. "Depends on who you're looking for," Diane replied carefully. The woman reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, placing it face down on the counter. "This is from about 15 years ago. He might look different now, but I was told he might be in this area." Marcus continued cleaning, but his attention was now fully focused on the conversation happening 20 feet away. Something about the woman's manner, professional, persistent, but not threatening, suggested she wasn't just looking for an old friend. "I'm not really good with faces," Diane said, which was a lie. Diane remembered everyone who'd ever eaten at Mel's, sometimes years after their last visit. The woman turned the photograph over, sliding it across the counter where Diane could see it. Marcus couldn't make out the image from his position, but he saw Diane's expression change subtly. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the kitchen before returning to the photograph. "Can't say I recognize him," Diane said, sliding the photo back across the counter. The woman studied Diane's face for a moment, then nodded and tucked the photograph away. "Well, if you do see him, or if anyone else around here might know him, I'd appreciate a call." She pulled out a business card and placed it next to her coffee cup. "My name's Janet Morrison. I work for the Veterans Administration." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. VA investigators didn't show up at random diners looking for people unless there was a serious reason. He continued his cleaning routine, but every instinct honed over years of training was now fully alert. "I'll keep that in mind," Diane said, pocketing the card without looking at it. Janet Morrison finished her coffee and left a generous tip before standing to leave. At the door, she paused and turned back toward the counter. "Sometimes people change their names when they want to disappear," she said conversationally, "but they usually keep something from their old life. A habit, a piece of jewelry, something that connects them to who they used to be." Her eyes swept the diner once more before she continued. "If you do see him, tell him Janet's looking for him. Not to cause trouble, to help." After she left, the diner felt different somehow. The same conversations continued, the same sounds of clinking dishes and scraping chairs, but Marcus was acutely aware of everything happening around him. He'd spent years building a quiet life in Bakersfield, becoming just another face in a small town where people minded their own business. Diane approached the kitchen pass, her expression troubled. "You okay back there? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just tired," Marcus replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. Long day. But his mind was racing now, calculating possibilities and considering options. The photograph could have been anyone. the woman might have been looking for someone completely unrelated to him. But the timing felt wrong, coming just hours after 3 military men had sat in the diner, studying their surroundings with the same professional awareness that Marcus recognized because he'd once shared it. The afternoon shift was winding down when Marcus made his decision. He untied his apron and hung it on its hook, then walked over to where Diane was counting the day's receipts. "I need to leave a little early today," he said. "Think you can handle the dinner prep?" Diane looked up, concerned. "Everything all right? You never leave early." Quote, "Just have something I need to take care of," Marcus replied. "Won't be a problem." As he headed toward the back exit, Marcus felt the weight of the metal against his chest shift slightly. For 15 years, it had been just a piece of his past, something he wore out of habit rather than pride or nostalgia. Now, for the first time in all those years, he wondered if someone else might recognize what it meant. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows as Marcus walked toward his apartment, his mind already working through the implications of what had just happened. In his former life, he'd learned that coincidences were rare and usually dangerous. 2 separate visits in one day by people who moved and spoke like professionals wasn't something he could ignore. But as he climbed the stairs to his small apartment above the auto parts store, Marcus realized he wasn't just worried about his own safety. Diane had lied to protect him without even knowing who she was protecting. That kind of loyalty deserved better than putting her at risk because of his past. Marcus spent the evening in his apartment staring at the business card Diane had slipped him when he'd returned to close the diner. Janet Morrison, Veterans Administration, Disability Claims Investigator. The card felt heavier than it should have, weighted with implications he'd spent 15 years trying to avoid. Sleep came in fragments that night, interrupted by dreams of desert compounds and the sound of helicopter rotors. When his alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., Marcus was already awake, staring at the ceiling and running through scenarios in his mind. By the time he arrived at Mel's to open up, he'd made his decision. The morning routine felt different now, every familiar action carrying the weight of potential finality. As he prepped the grill and started the first pot of coffee, Marcus found himself memorizing details he'd taken for granted. The way the morning light slanted through the front windows, the particular squeak of the walk-in cooler door, the comfortable weight of his work knife in his hand. Diane arrived at her usual time, but instead of her normal cheerful greeting, she studied his face with concern. "You didn't sleep," she observed. "Not much," Marcus admitted, cracking eggs onto the grill with mechanical precision. "That woman yesterday, she was looking for you, wasn't she?" Marcus glanced up, meeting her eyes. In 3 years of working together, they'd never had a conversation that went deeper than work schedules and customer preferences. But Diane had protected him yesterday without questions, and she deserved honesty. "Probably," he said. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "Not the kind you're thinking," Marcus replied. "At least, I hope not." The breakfast crowd began filtering in around 6:30, and for the next 2 hours, Marcus lost himself in the familiar rhythm of cooking. Orders came and went, coffee poured, conversations flowed around him like a river he was no longer part of. He was already separating himself mentally, preparing for whatever came next. At 8:45, the bell above the door chimed, and Marcus looked up to see the 3 men from yesterday walking in. They moved with the same professional bearing, but today there was a subtle difference in their posture, more alert, more purposeful. Behind them, Janet Morrison followed, her expression serious but not hostile. The diner's other customers continued their conversations, unaware that anything unusual was happening. Marcus set down his spatula and walked to the pass-through window, making direct eye contact with the sandy-haired man for the first time. "We need to talk," the man said quietly. Marcus nodded and untied his apron. "Diane, take over for a few minutes." "Marcus," she started. "It's okay," he said, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. This was always going to happen eventually. The group moved to the large corner booth, the same one the 3 men had occupied yesterday. Marcus slid in across from them, suddenly conscious of the metal resting against his chest beneath his work shirt. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Jake Patterson," the sandy-haired man said, his southern accent more pronounced now. "These are Petty Officers Rodriguez and Thompson. We're based at Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Marcus studied their faces, recognizing the type if not the individuals. "Active duty?" "Yes, sir," Patterson replied. We were driving back from a training exercise at Edwards when we stopped here yesterday. Rodriguez noticed something. He nodded to the man sitting next to him, a compact Latino with intelligent, dark eyes. The way you moved, Rodriguez said. The situational awareness. How you positioned yourself while cooking. But mainly this. He gestured toward Marcus's chest. You touched it twice while we were here. Unconscious habit. I've seen it before. Quote. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to his chest, feeling the familiar outline of the metal beneath his shirt. After 15 years, the gesture had become as automatic as breathing. Navy Cross, Thompson said quietly. He was the youngest of the three, probably early 30s, with the lean build of a distance runner. My grandfather had one from Vietnam. Same unconscious protective touch. Janet Morrison had been listening without speaking, but now she leaned forward. Marcus Chen isn't your real name, is it? Marcus looked at each of them in turn, these strangers, who had somehow seen through 15 years of careful anonymity in the space of a single breakfast. No, he said finally. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison, Force Recon Marines, Patterson said, decorated for actions in Fallujah, 2004. Reported killed in action during Operation Steel Thunder. The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus had never heard anyone speak his real name aloud since the day he'd officially died, and hearing it now felt like stepping out of a long, strange dream. You weren't killed, Janet Morrison said, consulting a thick folder she'd placed on the table. But your unit was overrun. You were listed as MIA for 8 months before the Pentagon declared you KIA. No body recovered, no witnesses to confirm death. There were witnesses, Marcus said quietly. They just didn't survive to report. But you did, Rodriguez observed. The question is, how did Marcus Chen end up cooking breakfast in Bakersfield? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching through the window as ordinary people went about their ordinary lives. When I got out of that prison camp, I wasn't the same person who went in. The Marines offered medical retirement, full disability, counseling, the whole package. He paused. But I couldn't be around people who knew what I'd been through. Couldn't handle the looks, the careful conversations, the way everyone treated me like something broken. So you disappeared, Patterson said. I started over. New name, new history, new life. Somewhere nobody knew Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison or what happened to him. Janet Morrison pulled out a photograph, the same one she'd shown Diane yesterday. It showed a younger Marcus in dress blues, the Navy Cross clearly visible on his chest. This was taken at the award ceremony. Your parents were there, your sister. Marcus stared at the photograph, remembering that day, the pride in his father's eyes, his mother's tears, his sister Sarah's fierce hug afterward. They think I'm dead. They've thought that for 15 years, Janet said gently. But 6 months ago, your sister hired a private investigator. She never believed you were gone. The investigator found financial records, traced Marcus Chen to this diner. Sarah's been looking for you, Patterson added. She never gave up. The weight of 15 years pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. He'd thought he was protecting his family by staying dead, sparing them the burden of what he'd become. But maybe he'd just been protecting himself. There's something else, Janet said, pulling out another document. The VA owes you 15 years of disability payments. It's a substantial amount, but more importantly... She paused. Your father had a heart attack last month. He's okay, but Sarah called our office afterward. She said the only thing he talked about in the hospital was wishing he could see his son one more time. Marcus felt the careful walls he'd built around his new life beginning to crumble. Through the window, he could see Diane managing the breakfast crowd alone, probably wondering if he was going to disappear like smoke. Why did you three get involved? He asked the SEALs. Because we recognize our own, Thompson said simply. And because sometimes good people need help finding their way home. Patterson leaned back in the booth. The question is, what do you want to do now? We can walk away, let you keep being Marcus Chen, or... He gestured toward Janet Morrison's folder. Marcus touched the metal one more time, feeling its familiar weight. For 15 years it had been a burden, a reminder of things he wanted to forget. But maybe it was time to let it be what it was originally intended to be, a symbol of honor, of service, of coming home. Sarah still lives in Phoenix? He asked. Janet Morrison smiled. Same house. She kept your room exactly the way you left it. Marcus stood up from the booth, walked over to the kitchen pass, and caught Diane's attention. "I need to make a phone call," he said. "Think you can handle things for a while?" Diane looked at the group in the corner booth, then back at Marcus. "Take all the time you need," she said. "And Marcus, whatever your real name is, you'll always have a job here if you want it." Quote. As Marcus dialed the number Janet Morrison had given him, his hands were steadier than they'd been in 15 years. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered, older now, but unmistakably his sister. "Hello? Sarah, it's me. It's Michael." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus could hear her breathing and could almost feel her shock through the phone line. "Michael?" Her voice cracked. Oh my God, is it really you?" "It's really me, Sarah." The sound of her sobbing came through the phone, 15 years of grief and hope colliding in a single moment. "I knew it. I always knew you were alive. Dad said I was crazy, but I knew." "How is he?" "Janet told me about the heart attack." "He's okay now, but Michael," her voice became urgent. "You have to come home. He's been talking about you constantly since the hospital. He keeps saying he should have looked harder, should have known you were out there somewhere." Marcus glanced back at the booth where Patterson, Rodriguez, Thompson, and Janet Morrison were waiting patiently. These strangers had given him back his life, his family, his identity. The weight of their kindness was almost overwhelming. "I'm in California right now, but I can drive to Phoenix. I should be there by tonight." "California? What are you doing in California? How long have you been?" Sarah's questions tumbled over each other, 15 years of wondering compressed into a few seconds. "It's a long story," Marcus said. "I'll tell you everything when I get there. Is Dad strong enough to see me?" "Michael, seeing you might be the only thing that could make him completely well again. Mom, too. She's going to lose her mind when she finds out. Mom's still Mom, still cooking too much food and worrying about everyone. Still talking about you like you just stepped out to the store and might be back any minute." Marcus closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the flood of memories. His mother's Sunday dinners, the way she'd fuss over him when he came home on leave, her tearful goodbye the last time he'd seen her. "Sarah, I need you to know something. I chose to disappear. After what happened over there, I couldn't be around people who knew me before. I thought it would be easier for everyone if Michael Harrison stayed dead." "Easier for who?" Sarah's voice carried an edge of anger now. "Do you have any idea what the last 15 years have been like? Not knowing, hoping every time the phone rang that it might be news about you?" "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and the words felt inadequate for 15 years of pain he'd caused. "I was trying to protect you all from what I'd become." "You idiot," Sarah said, but her tone was softening. "We didn't need protection from you. We needed you, period." Patterson approached the counter, nodding respectfully to Diane before addressing Marcus. "We need to head back to base, but first, you're going to need documentation. Janet has everything you need to reclaim your identity, but the process might take a few days." Marcus covered the phone. "What kind of documentation?" "Death certificate reversal, Social Security reinstatement, the works," Janet Morrison explained, joining them at the counter. "I can expedite most of it, but you'll need to come to the VA office in Fresno tomorrow to start the paperwork." "Sarah," Marcus said into the phone, "there are some legal things I need to handle before I can come home. Official stuff about being declared alive again." "How long will that take?" "A few days, maybe a week." "A week?" Sarah's disappointment was audible. "Michael, I don't think I can wait a week to see you, not after 15 years." Marcus looked around the diner, at Diane managing the breakfast crowd, at the familiar booths and counter stools, at the life he'd built from nothing. "What if you came here instead, just until I get the paperwork sorted out?" "Where's here?" "Bakersfield. There's a little diner called Mel's where I work. I have a small apartment, but there are motels nearby." "You work in a diner?" "I'm a cook. It's honest work, and the people here are good to me." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I can be there tonight. What's the address?" As Marcus gave her directions, he realized that his carefully compartmentalized life was about to explode into something much more complicated. Sarah would meet Diane, would see the small apartment where he'd hidden for 15 years, would understand the full scope of what he'd given up. "One more thing," Sarah said before hanging up. "What name have you been using?" "Marcus Chen." "Well, Marcus Chen," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. You're about to remember what it's like to have a family again." After he hung up, Marcus stood at the counter feeling like a man caught between two worlds. The SEALs were preparing to leave, shaking hands with him and providing contact information in case he needed anything. Janet Morrison was organizing paperwork and explaining the steps they'd need to take to legally resurrect Michael Harrison. "There's going to be media attention," she warned. "Marine declared dead, found alive 15 years later. It's the kind of story that gets picked up nationally. Can we avoid that? For a while, maybe, but your family's going to want to celebrate, and news like this has a way of getting out." Rodriguez clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "Whatever happens, you've got people in your corner now. That's what matters." As the group prepared to leave, Patterson handed Marcus a card. "My personal number. If you need anything at all, you call me. We take care of our own." After they left, the diner felt strangely normal again. Customers ate their breakfast, coffee poured, conversations continued. But Marcus felt like he was watching it all from outside, already beginning to separate himself from Marcus Chen's quiet life. "So," Diane said, approaching the counter with a fresh pot of coffee, "are you going to tell me what that was all about, or do I have to guess?" Marcus looked at this woman who had become the closest thing to family he'd had in 15 years. "My real name is Michael Harrison. First was a Marine, reported killed in action in 2004. I've been hiding here ever since." Diane poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. "Well, that explains a few things. The way you move. How you're always aware of everything happening around you. I figured you were running from something, but I thought maybe it was an ex-wife or gambling debts. Are you angry that I lied?" "Honey, everyone who ends up cooking in a truck stop diner is running from something. The fact that you were running from being dead makes you one of the more interesting employees I've had. My sister's driving up from Phoenix tonight. She's going to want to meet you." "Looking forward to it? She knows you've been playing dead for 15 years?" "She knows now. How'd she take it?" Marcus thought about Sarah's voice, the mixture of joy and anger and relief. About how you'd expect. The lunch crowd was starting to filter in, and Marcus realized this might be one of his last shifts at Mel's. The thought carried more sadness than he'd expected. This place had been his refuge, his chance to be someone uncomplicated. Once he became Michael Harrison again, that simplicity would be gone forever. "Diane," he said, "I might not be here much longer." Quote, "I figured as much. Are you going back to your old life?" "I don't know what my old life is anymore. It's been 15 years. "Then you'll have to build a new one, but this time you won't have to build it alone." As Marcus returned to the grill, he touched the metal one last time as Marcus Chen. Tomorrow, when he walked into the VA office in Fresno, it would become something different. Not a burden to be hidden, but a bridge back to the man he used to be and forward to whoever he was going to become. The afternoon passed in a strange suspended state. Marcus cooked, served, cleaned, all while mentally preparing for Sarah's arrival. At 6 p.m., just as the dinner crowd was settling in, a rental car with Arizona plates pulled into the parking lot. Through the window, Marcus watched a woman in her 40s step out of the car. She had their mother's face and their father's determined walk. Sarah Harrison, no longer the young woman he'd left behind, but unmistakably his sister. She paused at the diner's entrance, taking a deep breath before pushing through the door. Her eyes swept the room once before finding him behind the grill, and 15 years collapsed into nothing. "Hello, Michael," she said simply. "Hello, Sarah." And for the first time in 15 years, Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison was ready to come home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.